Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, Maria Tadeo.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us in this session. And now I would like to bring in our panelists. We're joined by Jozef Síkela. He is the Trade and Industry Minister of the Czech Republic. We're also joined by Martin Kocher. He is Austria's Economy Minister. Enrico Letta, who's a former Italian Prime Minister and also the President of the Jacques Delors Institute. Lucy C. Croning, she is EU Vice President for Public Policy at Amazon. And of course, Monsieur Le Remont, who is the Chair and CEO of EDF. Thank you very much. And on that note, and considering also that it is Prague that is hosting this wonderful conference, which every year manages to bring in a fresh perspective, I would like to start with you, Minister Síkela. If you allow me, I will tell an anecdote about you, because this is I think, says a lot about you. 2 years ago, I think everyone here remembers the energy crisis. And at the time, it was a Czech rotating presidency. It was a very difficult time. And you were handling a very difficult file, which was the energy market reform, the price gap. And you came up with a sentence that repeated, I will call as many meetings as necessary so we get a deal. And there were many meetings also running late in Brussels. So the question to you now is, what's necessary to restart this economy to make it competitive at a time in which obviously there's a lot of geopolitical confrontation?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this panel with the usual suspects from the energy crisis. And let me a little bit look back, because this winter marks 5 years, the time is running extremely fast, since the world fully became aware of the COVID-19, a disease that quickly escalated into a global pandemic. And since then, Europe has to face 2 or even 3 complex crises that tested the capacity for action, unity, and our ability to respond effectively and efficiently to these challenges. And let me start with the breakdown of supply chains, a shortage of the chips, which have become an increasingly essential foundation for today's economy. And let me remind that the automotive sector alone, that the production in that time fell by approximately a quarter. And recognizing the vulnerability of this area, and with the support of Czech presidency, we approved the European Chip Act. Its goal is to double Europe's share of semiconductor production, thereby strengthening our self-sufficiency in the critical area and economically leveraging the development. And last week, President Ursula von der Leyen announced the overall results, revealing that the CHIP Act has attracted a total of 115 billion euros in investment in less than 2 years. This investment had brought crucial projects like the TSMC factory in Saxony and the development of comprehensive chip production ecosystem of onsemi here in Czech Republic. And another crisis sparked by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Russia's strategy with exploited Europe's dependency of energy resources, exposing the continent to a serious threat of gas shortage, driving energy prices in Europe to the sky, to previously unimaginable heights. So Europe managed to respond effectively instead of, and you remember, freezing through the winter as Russian propaganda and some of also local propaganda predicted. We achieved the highest gas storage levels ever. Then we rapidly secured gas infrastructure in the form of LNG, and I am extremely proud to be a part of the story that Czech Republic has become probably the first landlocked country with our own LNG capacity, covering meanwhile around 40% of the Czech economy and household needs. So our strategy have also contributed to unprecedented growth of renewable resources. Just in Czech Republic, the number of photovoltaic plants quadrupled since 2022. And as we heard today, on the European level, renewables have become the largest producer of electricity overall. But, of course, the crucial point for the future is the electrification of the European economy. So basically, these are the measures, and I have started with the question if we responded effectively and efficiently, and I pretty believe that the answer is yes. And the spirit of the unity, of the collaboration, rather than competition, because our rivals are in a certain sense much faster and much more assertive, is, I think, the key simply to let the business grow, to create a value, and through the value creation to help to increase the wealth for the European population. So.
Well, Minister, thank you for the overview. And I will ask the same question to Minister Kocher. Obviously, there has been almost this idea that the worst did not manifest, but the fact that the worst is over doesn't mean that the future is as strong or potentially as competitive as it could be, and that's the big question now. So how do you see that in the future? I guess the key would be the implementation. How do you see that taking hold?
Thanks a lot for having me. First of all, it's always a pleasure to be at the Globsec event and in such an interesting panel. I'm not so much worried, and your question actually implies that to a certain extent about restarting the economy. I mean, we have business cycles, and the nature of business cycles is that after some time there's a restart. What is important is that this restart is a strong one. We need strong, sustainable growth. We need competitiveness, and I think there's a lot of things that we need to achieve that for the European Union. First of all, there's awareness, and I think that's important. And I think we have much more awareness for competitiveness as a top priority in the next 5 years of the Commission and in many other national countries of the European Union than we had 2 or 3 years ago. I think people understand. Of course, lots of people have contributed, and Enrico Letta is traveling like crazy, actually, to make sure that everybody understands how important it is to focus on competitiveness. And I think we know quite well what we need. I would sometimes call the European Union as the champs of the European or the world champs of the analysis. We have to make sure that we are acting soon on those issues where we lost competitiveness. And that's partly in the prices, that's energy prices. We need more reforms. There were a lot of reforms, but more reforms to make sure that energy comes at a price that is competitive to companies. That needs also a lot of infrastructure investments throughout the European Union that are quite expensive, but will actually make us more competitive in the long run. We must make sure, in my opinion, to reduce the cost for companies in terms of regulation. That's a very important aspect. And the third important aspect that is at the moment actually limiting many companies is the availability of experienced and skilled labor. So we have to make sure that we have enough young people, enough qualified employees. That's a huge task, usually on the national level, but together with those tasks that the international, the European level has, in terms of making us more competitive, I think it is pretty clear what we have to do. The point is now that we have to get acting.
And you made a very good point that now will connect me to Mr. Letta, because you said at times the EU is very good at making the analysis, but is that switch into turning that into actual policy that can become either very difficult or very long in time?
Absolutely, that's the case. And you need, of course, public support. It is the more important that people try to convince the public of the competitiveness as one of the key elements of a policy in the next couple of years.
Well, thank you for that. Mr. Letta, you have, well, if you allow me the expression, traveled like crazy over the past few months. You presented a report on the single market, and there was a line that you said it's now much more than a market. It has to be more than that. It's interesting that you also hear the president of the Commission now, confirmed for a second term, use some of the lines in that report. The minister also said that there has been a dialogue. Do you believe your interlocutors and other countries and public officials are listening to your message? Do they get it?
I think so. I'm very happy that Ursula von der Leyen decided to have in her speech at the European Parliament and the support of the European Parliament. And on the speech, there are some of the most important parts of the report that are there. And today, we listened here, Ursula von der Leyen clearly saying that security and competitiveness are one single word, jointly. And I think it is the reason why what both Jozef and Martin said is totally right. And I would like to say very clearly that we have to stop crying and we have to act. And to act, we have to act trying and finding from inside the assets, because we have full of assets inside. I say that for a very simple reason. The core of my report is saying clearly that half of the economic system is not integrated in Europe, because the member states, 40 years ago, when Jacques Delors created the single market, told Jacques Delors, yes, but. They told, yes, but financial services is a national strategic dimension, so no integration. And so we have today 27 financial markets. Who is happy because we have 27 financial markets? Wall Street. Yes, but telecom. Telecom is a national strategic dimension. Who is happy today because we have 27 market systems? Well, Chinese, Americans. Yes, but energy. 40 years ago, they told Delors, energy is a national strategic dimension. And the consequence is that we are not strong enough on energy. So having this idea of the national strategic dimension as the main flagship on these sectors is making happy Americans, Chinese, and our competitors. So this is why my big topic is to say it is not an ideological discussion among those who are in favor of the European flag and those who are in favor of the national flag. Because in Europe we are always struggling about this discussion. Pro-Europeans against pro-national and pro-national against pro-European. No, it's a problem of growth, jobs creation, and only if we are able to have, and I propose 3 roadmaps on how in the next 3 years integrate these 3 systems. If we are not able to do so, we can just manage our decline as Europeans. If you are able to relaunch the European integration on these 3 main subjects, we are able to have a new narrative. And I end up by saying one point. This is exactly what von der Leyen said today. It is very important. We strongly need the passion and the new narrative coming from Central European countries. And the message coming from Prague today is a very strong message, because in our old European countries we are experiencing a little bit of fatigue. So we need youth, we need passion, we need new narrative, and this passion can come from here.
So very briefly, you do believe that Central and Eastern Europe, perhaps in this new cycle, could be a major engine for growth?
Yes.
Do you believe that story is going to materialize?
I can tell you that it was one of the outcomes of my journey around Europe. I visited 65 cities. I was in Prague twice. I was in Austria 3 times. I met more than 400 meetings. I had the feeling that here there's a dynamic, there's momentum, there's a will to consider that, maybe also for a very simple reason. You know that there are two groups of countries in Europe. The small countries and countries they don't know they are still small. And the key point is that here, you know that you are not big enough to stay alone. And you need, and you know that it's absolutely necessary to stay together. And I would like this message, all the European countries can understand that today it is no more time, there's no more room for cavalier seul, cavalieri solitari, for people going alone. No, it's time to stay together. It's the only way to avoid the decline. It's the only way to have a new narrative and to be competitive with the Americans and the Chinese.
Well, thank you for that. And now a question perhaps on the corporate side for you, Lucy. There's, of course, a vision that a company like Amazon can bring into this debate, although it's not a secret that you are ultimately a US company, but you operate in Europe on a huge scale. I wonder, when you hear the messaging and potentially the policy that may be implemented, as a big corporate player, do you like what you hear? And is there a sort of gap between what you see on paper and what you see on the daily realities of running a business?
There's about 3 questions in there, but I'll do my best. Look, the debate around the boost or reboost of the European economy is one that's very important to a company like Amazon. When you have 150,000 employees in a region, when you have invested 150 billion in that region, when you are working with 125,000 EU-based SMEs, any policy development or any discussions that relate to the European economy are, of course, extremely important to a company like Amazon. When we look at the boosting of the European economy, you know, the very unique selling point for a company like Amazon vis-a-vis this region is, of course, the single market. We have been in Europe for 25 years now, maybe 26, and it has been through the harnessing of the single market that we have been able to really invest in the European economy. And you know, we would like to think that through the introduction of cloud technology, you know, very, very high-tech logistics networks, jobs, skills, etc., that we ourselves have a part to play in the rebooting and the competitiveness of the European Union. But there's no doubt that Dr. Letta was right when his very aptly named report, More Than Just a Market. That's absolutely right. The single market is, to me, the absolute fundamental economic driver of the European Union, sitting where we're sitting as a company. And you know, it is most certainly very encouraging to see President von der Leyen refer to that over the summer, about the importance of the single market and what's needed to be done. But because we work with so many of these European SMEs, I guess we have a little bit of a bird's eye view of what frustrates these SMEs when they're sitting in one member state and they want to do business in another member state. And these are not mountains, these are hills, these are, you know, technical things that could be fixed by the European Union. I'm talking about simplification of VAT rules. I'm talking about simplification of labeling requirements on products. I'm talking about harmonization of producer responsibility schemes. Everything that costs time or money to a European SME to move from one country to another country impacts the competitiveness of the European Union. So anything that policymakers can do to make their lives easier and make their ability to harness that single market is really important. The final thing I would say is when we as sort of a corporate entity in Europe, albeit a very big investor in Europe, look at the policy conversation in the European Union, there is no doubt that if the European Union achieves the digital decade goals that it set itself by 2030, that will add trillions to the European economy. Now, in order to do that, European policymakers need to be very thoughtful and very mindful about how they harness AI technology and other innovative technologies, and that they allow for the space for those technologies so that those technologies can in turn assist in the boosting of the economy and competitiveness. And finally, I would say, as a very large investor in the European Union, we feel very strongly that the investment environment in the European Union needs to remain open. There are many, many small European companies that we have invested in over the years. Ivona in Poland, now producing Alexa, which is a technology that's exported globally. It's really important that those wishing to invest in the European economy are permitted and allowed and encouraged to invest in the European economy.
And just very briefly, if I understand everything correctly, that you say you argue in some areas there's too much regulation, in other ones you could really do with cutting red tape. But also, I wonder, as a U.S. company, de facto and by name and origin too, you're not bothered by the idea perhaps of a more stronger European Union that may say, I'd like to have my own Amazon, for example. Is that something that you think about?
I think as long as you have a European Union that is open and fair and provides a level playing field for all economic actors that are looking to invest in Europe, then that's fine.
On that note, now let's get to Monsieur Remont. Obviously, the final piece of the puzzle here has to do with energy security, and I think, like Minister Síkela said, and he saw this firsthand, it came with a huge cost ultimately for the European economy. How do you see it adding now value in the next few years? But also, Mr. Kocher also said something very interesting. The price of energy is still very expensive for a lot of companies. So how do you solve that gap?
Well, first, I think the crisis, as Minister Síkela said, has been revealing our dependencies on energy. I think we started to forget that most of our energy relies on imported sources, which are essentially carbon fossil molecules coming either through fuel or through gas. And this is something that was in our day-to-day usage, but we started to forget about it. So the crisis has been revealing this. Now, looking ahead, we need to continue to look at our dependencies and compare with the other large markets. If we want a single market, we need to define what we want for the market. And if you look at the other large markets, let's take the US and China. US is relying primarily on self-originated oil and gas with no carbon price, to limited carbon price. We are in the EU relying on electricity and oil and gas, not self-originated, imported. And China is relying still at this stage primarily on imported oil and a lot of coal, even though they are doing an impressive shift to low carbon in electricity, thanks to nuclear and renewables. So these are different level playing fields in these three big markets. On our market, we need to define what we want. Do we want to get out of the carbon fossils? I think this is the majority of Europe has voted for that. We say yes. Then what are the level playing field agreements that we have with the other markets so that the carbon price that we have is reflected in the fair trade that we have with these markets? That's a very important point, and I think we still have to work on that so that we make a level playing field with the other big geographies. That's part of the fair trade agreement that we need. And then on our electricity market, which is my part of the business, clearly we need to come to a common vision on what electricity should be. So Minister Síkela worked a lot, as you said, rightly so, with his counterparts to come to a common agreement on how the market rules should work, which is a very strong achievement that has been made last year. Now, we need also to have a common strategy on electricity. And do we want an electricity market that leads to an electricity that is fully renewable and leads the users of electricity to be forced to work when there is sun or wind? Not sure this is reliable. Do we want to aim at an electricity balance that enables the full electrification, the higher electrification of the energy? Today, electricity represents barely 25 to 30% of the energy mix. If we want more electricity that is self-generated, on which we are more reliant, then we need to have 24/7. 24/7 low carbon means that we need to have a mix where there is renewables for a big share, but also dispatchable power generation, and that means nuclear and other sources that are dispatchable, such as hydro and others. we need to come to a common vision on that. And I think we are making progress in that direction, but there's still discussions to be held.
And just very briefly, obviously you're representing, you're the face of EDF, and you have skin in this game. And of course, you have a...
More than a skin, quite a bone as well.
So this is, taking that into account, what would you say is the energy mix of the future? I'm talking about now value for money, but also energy security. If you were just to quantify it very briefly, what would it look like? What do you think it's going to look like?
Well, the main element is how far do we electrify? That's where we should make a huge effort. Because electricity is generated by ourselves. And we can do that in a self-reliant manner. We don't need to import most of the electricity generation capacity, provided that we target a low-carbon electricity. By doing this, we increase our security and we increase our self-reliance. That's the biggest strategic element on which we should work. And I think there is more and more alignment on this, in this direction. Then everyone can choose in the market whether they want this or that. The question is, what do we reach as a comprehensive balance on the European market so that overall we have a balanced market with generation, transmission, distribution capacities? Because electricity needs to be balanced every minute. And you need to generate every minute all the electricity that is expected by European consumers, whether they are households or industries. And this needs more and more dispatchable, commandable capacities to make sure that we are self-reliant 24/7. That's where we need to come strategically to a vision that would probably take us to the 2030s.
Cool. And on that note, just a reminder, there will be questions from the audience. I would just do a final quick second round, and then we'll put the questions to the audience. Minister, of course, everything that we've debated, in practical terms, will have to get done in a consensus manner and with unity. Otherwise, it's impossible to do anything in the EU. It is becoming more difficult. I think it is clear for everyone to see that that unity is politically at times challenging. Of course, I don't want to get into the Hungarian presidency, but you do know that out there's concern that perhaps you're going to see a number of months potentially lost. How much do you worry that this unity is being tested, and how much can it hinder everything that we've just debated?
Well, seeing some of the developments across the continent, we have to be worried. I was born in '67. So I was too young to remember the Russian invasion to the Czech Republic. We remembered recently, the night from 21st to 22nd August. But I'm old enough to remember all the evil which basically dictatorship and communism brought to this country and to this region. Therefore, basically, I'm still surprised that, and we all remember the Munich Agreement, which, and we can now look back if it helped, to prevent the war, the Second World War on the continent. So I'm slightly surprised that that there are simply voices or the tendency to forget extremely fast. We can accept democratically elected governments, but we must not accept is that even the democratically elected governments are dismantling the democratic institutions in the countries.
And that's happening, would you say, in the EU as we speak? Not naming names if you don't want to, but...
I think that in some areas there are the tendencies in this direction. But what I want to say is that these 2 or 3 cumulated crises has shown that basically the unity, the collaboration, and the solidarity is basically the way how to solve the issues, the way how to tackle the challenges, and maybe for the future even how to prevent the crisis. So we have to collaborate more because we see that more Europe is much better than less Europe. But doing this, we have to understand, and this is the holy rule, and this is from your climbing, and this is the holy rule in mountains, or if you take care of children, that if you want to keep the group together, you have to perfectly look, especially on the weaker parts of the group. Otherwise, you will lose them on the way. So I think that basically to work closely together, to seek for the alignments, not for the compromises. This is a big difference between a compromise and alignment, which will be beneficial for all the countries together. To work more, to collaborate more with like-minded countries, with the Western democracies, with countries sharing the same values, is basically the way how to beat the crisis in the future, how to stop the war, and how basically the prevent the crisis in the future. And we should not forget the old saying that if two fights, the third one lost. You know? So this is basically what we have to accept. If we will not cooperate, if we will just compete, the winners will be different ones.
And on that note, Minister Kocher, this is a question, also one part of it coming from the audience, which combines both the economics but also the politics of it. It's a difficult question for a number of reasons, because when we talk about competitive and competition at times, there's this idea in Europe that it will require more public money and it will require more funding. Politically, that is a very toxic debate in the EU. There's another part of this which also means it will require more workers, and that means migration. Politically, we know what the mood looks like right now when it comes to migration in Europe. So then how do you deal with it?
Of course, I mean, I'm not saying that everything is easy, but I think there are solutions that can easily be described that can be supported by a large majority. First of all, when we talk about money, I think there's huge opportunities, and we are only scratching the surface of what we could do in terms of leveraging private investments by public money. So we don't need that much public money. The European approach very often is we need a large fund, public money, and then everything is solved.
You say that's not needed.
I mean, we have that for certain areas, and for certain areas it's necessary. But for the investments in a business project, in terms of sustainability, for instance, in the transition of our energy system, there will be benefits that will take some time to reap these benefits. But private investments are there. Lots of people would actually like to contribute to the transition, and they would invest if there is instruments. I'm pretty sure that the European Investment Bank and the European Commission can come up with very good ideas on leveraging private investments with limited public funds. And national countries do that as well, actually. So that's the first thing. I think we have a lot of chance here. There's much more attention to these investment opportunities nowadays than 5 years ago, and that makes me positive. The second thing you mentioned is migration. I think there it's more complicated, absolutely. We have to distinguish and convince a broad public of the necessities that come with demographic change. And they are there, and you can't change it anymore for the next 10 to 15 years. The workforces are shrinking in many European countries. So it's clear that either we invest a lot in improvements of labor productivity. Artificial intelligence was mentioned, and I think that's one of the aspects that we should actually take into account. But it will not be enough, and all the countries need migration, qualified migration, and I see a change in the public perception. Countries that have been quite concerned or quite restrictive, they change because you see it not only for economic purposes, for private companies, you see it also in the public sectors, in the healthcare sector, in elderly care, and other aspects that is typically publicly organized in many countries, and where you have a need for qualified migration. Otherwise, those services cannot not be provided. And I'm sure this will be convincing in the end.
And thank you for that. Mr. Letta, I wonder, just very briefly before we go to the audience, we've talked about the implementation of these policies, we've talked about the challenges. Just very briefly, there's always the counter, the push to it, which suggests it is ultimately going to be power grab, basically, by Brussels. Brussels will get more power. How's the right balance with some of the national capitals? And that's always a tension. Do you believe this time it will be different?
I give you an example of what I think can be the solution of this conundrum, is the idea of the 28th virtual state. That is, in my view, one way to solve one of the most important problems. That is the problem of complexity. We have 27 business laws, 27 fiscal systems, 24 languages. Europe is a mess. For someone coming from abroad and thinking, I want to invest to Europe, and for some countries you have to add the regional differences. So the idea I put in the report is the idea to create a 28th virtual state that is not the, how we say, it is not pushing to cancel the differences. So it is not a question to cancel the national business law. It is clear that it is impossible. The point is to add one optional European system, a sort of Delaware 28th business law, to make a comparison with the US. With the idea that you are an SME, you discuss on how to take more simplification. We have one single business law for this 28th virtual state. You choose this one, and through this one you have a passport to going all over Europe and applying this virtual 28th virtual state everywhere. So it's an optional system. The two are continuing working. So it is not the way from Brussels to kick against the member states. It's the way to give options. A big company can choose this 28th virtual state, is a way to avoid all the differences, and an SME can be really helped by this idea. So it's an option, is the way to make more simplification. I can tell you then, when I presented this idea in the US, all the investors listening, they told me, finally, you understood that the main problem for us is the complexity of Europe. And the same for SMEs, and the same for the system of companies. So I think it is a good idea. Sharp, I would say, is the way not to be in a contraposition, is not a conflict, is an option, but I'm sure this option can win.
Well, on that note, let's now turn to the audience. The time is quite short, so if we could keep the questions short, that would be great. Gentleman over there, if you could introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Vladimír Dlouhý. I'm president of Eurochamber, the European Association of Chambers of Commerce and Industry. I would like to second very much what Mrs. Koronin and now Enrico Letta mentioned. This is, for the SMEs, it's really those 27 different systems. It's a kind of a jungle, preventing basically all cross-border or most of the cross-border economic activities. And we have made a huge report over 40 countries in Europe, because we have not only EU members but associated, etc. And this was exactly one of the biggest complaints, what they would like to change. My question now, Enrico, to you, because obviously it's $1 million question. Is now time ripe for the next 5 years Commission and on the level of the national government indeed to change anything about it, or to create your 28th virtual state? Because the problem is that these are, compared to the big things like the energy security, nitty-gritty details. Will be national governments ready for that, and will be the Commission ready for that?
Okay, very shortly. Thank you so much, Mr. Letta. Short time bid.
Vladimir, I'm optimistic also because in the speech of Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament, she mentioned this idea of the 28th virtual state. And you know very well that the European way to work, if this idea is in this formal speech, and the Parliament voted supporting von der Leyen and the program that she presented, now it's time to implement it. I think this idea can be the right compromise in this battle between the European flag and the national flags. Europe can be only winning if the two are coexisting. So I think this idea can be the one. I am very happy because von der Leyen put it in the program, and I think it is fundamental so for another thing, because these topics are also the rest of the sectors I mentioned are essential for security. I would like to underline this point, and I end up here. Security is not just weapons. Security is energy independence, as Jozef said. Security is the possibility to have on telecom a strong European connectivity. We are not secure enough on that. Europe was the center of the tech revolution in the 80s and the 90s. Today we are lagging behind China and the US on that too. And the same is for the financial services. We are lagging behind. Everything is Wall Street. Everything is American. I want to say that all the transactions that we have in Europe are all, as consumers, as tourists, are all transactions made with American platforms. I think if we all know what does it mean. And it is the demonstration that we are too weak. We are a colony. And we are bigger than the US. In terms of gold medals at the Olympics, we were better than the US altogether.
But some say there was a bit of a trick in the math, but let's not open that debate. Sir, of course, if we could just very short questions so we have time to take all of them. Thanks.
Absolutely. Won't be a long statement. So, Kocher, Everstream AI, I'm Chief Industry Officer, and I wonder about economy a lot. So economy and energy go hand in hand. Austria depends 95% on Russian gas right now on its consumption. Electrification requires a lot of materials that are in control of China and Russia. Think about the nuclear power plants in France running on uranium from Mali. So when we think about that, a mine takes 29 years from idea to done. So what's the solution with, with this situation from your perspective? Thank you.
And your question is addressed to, I presume, Mr. Kocher, and then if you want very briefly to Mr. Síkela too, but very briefly.
I'll probably briefly, I'll just correct the 95%. It's not 95%. The average over the year is around 50, 60%. It's too much, but there's a clear plan to be independent of Russian gas until 2027, actually. So this is in the near future. And of course, there is enormous diversification efforts taking place at the moment to make sure that this is going to happen. But you're right, absolutely. In other areas, we also are, of course, dependent. I think partnerships, strategic partnerships, worldwide partnerships will be important, will be essential actually to reach our targets.
And if I understood your question correctly, you're also saying, and this is a question for you, Minister, that by trying to separate some dependencies, you maybe create new ones that are also bad.
Diversification and the work with the reliable partner is the way. This is the basic principle of the risk management. As a former banker, I can say. Yeah? Dependency is wrong, diversification is right. As of the first day of the war, the Czech Republic dependency on Russian fuels was ultimate one. 99% gas, 100% nuclear fuel, and more than 50% crude oil. Within less than 1 year, we turned down the dependency, not the supplies, the dependency, because there are no sanctions for the Russian gas currently, to zero. Because in the period last year, there were like 7 months where basically the inflow from the east when it comes to, so it is solvable. This is the first thing. When it comes to raw materials, yes, I fully agree with you, a extremely difficult question. We were talking about the weaponizing of energy, and we have to be aware that what is happening now, like Russian activities, for example, in Africa, is about weaponizing the strategic raw materials for the future. And this is something what we have to avoid. But the way is not a protectionism. Yeah? Simply, we need to have a certain technological advantage. On the other side, we have to ensure the access to the strategic raw materials. And this is about a free trade. This is not about a relationship like a buyer and seller, but this is also about sharing with these countries the benefits, the like education, to access to the new technologies. So the solution in my eyes is to make the hot fixes, like in the so to ensure the strategic infrastructure. There is simply the way how to, through the reverse flow, basically turn the initially built infrastructure from east to west in a positive way. And when it comes to strategic raw materials, we simply have to work more with more countries closer, but we have to be faster. Yeah? Simply 30 years for like negotiations, the Mercosur, it's slightly too long. Yeah?
And there's one final question, but if I may say a very brief remark, sir, you get very excited talking about energy. I think a lot of people believe the next energy commissioner should have that excitement, should be that passionate about the portfolio. What do you think? Mr. Síkela, for you. Yes, the next...
You have to ask the next energy commissioner. I see on the panel a question, what will be my first step, or
yes.
if I get an economic portfolio. So there are some conditions precedent. So I don't know what will be my first step, because I don't know which portfolio I should be responsible for.
But you're not energetic about one specifically.
We were talking a lot about single market.
Yes.
The single market is the biggest asset of European Union, and we have to deepen the single market. Also when it comes to energy, financial services, and other areas. And we were talking about the electrification, because we will need much more electricity in the future. Yeah, you were talking, Luc was mentioning 25–28%. We still burn a lot of molecules. We have to replace the molecules by hydrogen molecules where necessary, or by electricity, because we need for the e-mobility, we need to replace the high furnaces by electric arc ones in order to keep the like a green industry, for example, the green steel production also in Europe. And for this we need the electrification, we need a power generation, but what we need also is the interconnectivity. We simply have to ensure that all the cheap produced electricity will be able to reach basically the places where the electricity, where is the lack of electricity. And this is the big step ahead of us, because we have to either go by like an island approach, simply to ensure the country by country energy security. It helps, but what is much cheaper is simply to have like a cross-border approach, and to use for all the possible solution also a cross-border cooperations.
And you seem to be ready for the parliamentary auditions that are also coming in the next few weeks. Sir, just a final question, very briefly, and then you address to who you want this question answered by.
Hüseyin Bağcı from Ankara, Ankara Global Advisory Group. Very simple question. Migration. Do you talk about legal migration or illegal migration? How do you cope with this illegal migration? Coming from a country where we have the most important population of illegal migrants, how do you solve this problem, including Turkey? Do you have a new agreement? What do you think about it?
Who wants to take this question?
No experts on illegal migration, I think, on this panel.
No
very briefly, I think I talked about legal migration, of course, but it's clear that it has to be a priority as well of the European Commission in the next years to advance all the plans that we have on making sure that the borders are protected well. It is, I think, an essential target for the European Union to make sure that there's control over the borders. We can talk about all the rules associated to how to enter the countries. I think there's lots of aspects that matter here, economic aspects, other aspects, but keeping the borders controlled is important.
As you'd expect a public officer also to say, that's what makes this also so difficult, this debate. Of course, you can't agree to no. Mr. Letta, just very briefly on this topic of migration.
It is very positive, but it is positive only if it is not, as it is today, one-way ticket. And today it is one-way ticket, from east to west and from south to north. And it is, if it is one-way ticket, at the end of the day, it doesn't work. So my big suggestion also in the report to the next Commission, Jozef, is also the future cohesion funds and the future cohesion policy has to consider that the problem of peripheric regions is absolutely central in Europe. Otherwise, the spoliation in terms of population of these regions is creating problems to them and also problems to the regions where you are more attractive. And it is creating a social problem that is becoming also an economic problem. I underline this point because migration is not just an external problem, it's also an internal topic.
Within the Union. Well, on that note, thank you so much. Thank you for all your questions. Of course, thank you to the Czech authorities for hosting this Globsec edition in Prague. It's been a pleasure, and we'll look forward to seeing you next edition. But before, there are refreshments, and there will be a coffee break, and then we'll be back in this room. Thank you very much.